caregiving of students and each other, and how we need to be mindful of the Marys that we develop in Mercy institutions, or the Marthas that we develop, and try to help us to be a little bit more like Mary and give space for faculty to do more scholarship and staff to also be creative and pursue things in their discipline. And we have to work out ways to do this, even in our climate of giving additional. The burdens that are dropped often are gathered in by the women of institutions. And women, it's not men that do this, it's society, and women have expectations of other women, especially in Mercy institutions. So I wrote about this, but then when I heard when Dr. Humphrey was coming, I thought, oh no. Because I was talking about, as women leaders in Mercy institutions, we need to think about the tasks that we put. And I thought, she's going to think I'm targeting her. So after I gave my talk, and we had a discussion, she raised her hand and she says, I feel targeted. That was her first thing. So this talk actually is a nice progression from that talk, because we are concerned about everyone in our community, and the ability to help, we all serve our students, but sometimes, we need to step back and think about how the institution is creating an atmosphere and a culture where we need to serve ourselves as well. And that's why we're here today. Since we are the first group from Carlow to speak, we're going to introduce some of the background of Carlow, and also this relates to the topic. So this is the student enrollment. Many of our institutions, many of us have small schools, but as you know, even if you're a small school, you have to have all the functions of even a major university. You still have to have a robust registrar, you have to have a robust you still have to staff all of these functions. And so many of our offices are just one or a few people. And that is probably a concern in many institutions. We serve undergraduate students and graduate students. We have many adult age students who have special needs, as well as traditional students so many of us have a diverse populations that we try to, make sure that we're welcoming and of all different types of students, including transfer students. We also have graduate students. And many more of us are doing more and more online offerings. So what does that mean in terms of another layer of things that we need to think about? And I was actually thinking about your COVID singing, because when I talk to faculty, a lot of times they say, in a classroom you get energy back. But when you're, that was one of the most exhausting things to be teaching, and the energy that comes back from students doesn't translate as much, and so it's a little bit more exhausting sometimes to do all that editing and do all the extra work. So, and then for our human resources, Marianne is our face of our human resources area. We also need to think about what our staffing looks like, and we all probably have challenges in this area. So we have full-time faculty, full-time staff, but also adjunct or part-time faculty and staff, and what are their experience and their needs, and how can we integrate them into our Mercy community, and how can we help them to the best ability that we can have a healthy life and be part of our community. So we all may have missions that are similar to this, but in my office, one of the things we try to do is we try to determine, we work with senior leadership and strategic planning, to what degree do you think people in your institution feel an affinity for your mission and feel an affinity to the Mercy values? Do you ever try to learn about the pockets of people who might feel disengaged? So one of the things we're going to do is talk about a survey that we did to try to get a feel for how different groups of people are feeling and the challenges that people have, and how much the Mercy mission resonates with people. So Actually, I'm going to invite you to think about, if you did a survey and asked, the mission informs my work, what percentage of your population would say yes? Just invite you to think about it. So our Mercy values at Carlow, they probably look similar to our values in other institutions. We all have different ways that we try to integrate them in how we treat people, how we treat each other and our students. We choose a value every year to do a deep dive. So for example, when I came to Carlow, it was hospitality year. And I had thought hospitality was like yummy scones and serving refreshments, which is a big part of hospitality that I really like. But as we have discussions, you learn that it's making sure that everyone has a proper place at the table. It's making sure that you are inclusive and you have diversity and you recognize the voices of others and you try to have represent. So there's ways to do a deep dive into each of these values. So for our employee experience survey that we first developed in 2019, we decided, we had previously done the best colleges to work for survey. We had previously done that, and so we were talking about that survey because it's free until you want to order reports and things, but it's free. But then we thought we can take some of those ideas from that survey and we could organize it by our Mercy values and add to it pertinent questions that we really would like to know about how our employees, the experience working at Carlow in the lens of Mercy. So I'd be happy to send you a copy of the survey at any point. I'll maybe include it in the proceedings. So we have a committee together, and Sister Sheila was, of course, a member of actually, original member. I was brought in later of the committee. And one thing that I wanted to make sure, for any type of survey like this, you need to make sure that all the senior leadership are on board and are familiar with the survey before you distribute it. I've seen other institutions go through the whole process of gathering feedback only to have it shut down and none of the results shared. So you need to be understanding and welcoming constructive criticism. Even if it's not that constructive, you need to understand, if you ask questions, you have to understand that you're going to get things back. And even in, I would say schools similar to ours, sometimes those things are hard to look at. So one thing that I try to do is help prepare leadership to welcome. It's hard to get feedback. Even at my age, when I sit down for an eval, I'm like, I'm a feedback person, but please don't hurt me. Please don't hurt me. So to help prepare people to get feedback from employees and assure them that you are going to get you hear some things that might hurt you because you're trying to help people and it might not come through. But it's important that you get the perspectives. So if you're doing surveys like this, I really encourage you to make sure that people like show the items that are being asked and say that, be prepared for the responses. Because a lot of times there's all these wonderful things and then there's 5 comments that are like, why would they say that? So, we need to be prepared. In 2019, we had a robust response rate. But for this last year, when we did instrument, I made a goal for at least like a majority of at least the full-time faculty and the full-time staff. That was a goal. And we got in the high 60% for the faculty, which is amazing for faculty surveys. We have other faculty surveys, and I work really hard to get close to 30%. And we got over 50% for full-time staff. And we also included part-time faculty and staff. So I just wanted to say that our response was even greater this time around. And I remember in 2019, I would get calls from faculty and, is this really anonymous? Is this really anonymous? Mm-hmm. So, it is something that is, people are a little bit wary about expressing themselves by survey. So I think this also shows that we did a pretty good job with the data from the 2019, and they tend to trust us. So here are just some, I mean, it was, under each of the Mercy values, there were about 20 questions or so. And they're all different forms of questions, and they all have qualitative sections. So these are just a few of them. So when I asked you to think about, for mission, first of all, are people familiar or acquainted with the mission? Some people might say no. I understand the ways in which my job contributes to the fulfillment of our mission. What do you think at your institution? Do people really understand how they fit the mission? How does Carlow's Mercy identity inform my work at my university? I can look to my supervisor or department chair to model the university's values. And then from the perspective of meaningful employment, Carlow is a good place to work. This is kind of taken directly from the best places to work. So I'm going to show you the percentages that we got in the 2023 survey. Well, I'll show it to you first. So nearly 100%. There are three people that said that they're not acquainted with the mission. So out of 226 people, 3 said they weren't. 96%. These are pretty good numbers. But when you think about it, 88% is really good. It's affirming to get these kind of results. And some people say, well, they're not worth anything. It just, but, if you don't ask, you might not know that people have a connection to your mission or the Mercy values. But even when you're at 88%, I can't help but wonder, what about that 12% that say that the Mercy identity doesn't inform their work at the university? And this was, by the way, a 4-point scale with strongly agree, moderately agree, and then same for disagree. So it's a 4-point scale. So, we can look a little bit more closely and think about, our caring about a smaller population is part of Mercy and what their experiences are and why it might be different. So here is from this slide is from the qualitative data. We used, if anybody's interested in that type of thing, I can talk to you later. We used 2 different softwares, one different one in 19 and 23. But these are we had 2 questions at the end. What is most rewarding about working at Carlow, and what is most challenging? And we did a comparison between the themes that arose in 2019 and then again in 2023. And for the most rewarding, the top themes were virtually the same. The students, the Mercy mission, my colleagues, contributing to student success. Those were the top themes for both faculty and staff. In terms of the most challenging, they were similar. We still had workload and compensation be a challenge. We still had administrative decisions, which, similar to my paper about how we expect a lot of each other. We are very innovative. We care so much about our community and the community at large. We want to accomplish so many things in our Mercy mission, but sometimes that trickles down to people actually implementing it. It becomes a challenge. And work-life balance was also 2019 and 2023. So in different ways they talked about it. But I want to say, because of this survey, the most challenging things, one thing that came out in our area was procurement was a challenge that was mentioned quite a bit back in 2019. So that's one thing that was actionable, and there was a big effort to make procurement not such a stressful and challenging thing at our university. And that dropped significantly off of the most challenging. In fact, there was a open response, and it was like, the procurement team is awesome. We really like the new procurement. So that was something that as a result of this survey, we were able to address. There was dissatisfaction in terms of recognizing the work that you do, especially among staff. This was much less, it was still mentioned, but at a much lower rate in the 2023 survey. Also, even though administrative decisions in terms of workload were mentioned, the hierarchy of administration and how administration treats people was much less in 2023 than 2019. So we had made, we had made strides in all of these areas from those 2 years.
Good. That's good. Is it the top?
Yep.
Okay, so as Edie said, we administered the survey in early 2023. We knew that we had to do something in terms of reacting to the results. Like, what are we going to do to address what comes out of the results? Because if you don't do anything, then guess what? There's probably not going to be as high participation in years to come, right? So we worked a lot in the summer to try to figure out what we needed to look at. And one of the things that kept coming out was work-life balance. What is work-life balance? People would ask, what is work-life balance? So again, we took the summer to kind of look at some of the results, and we decided that work-life balance was one of those areas that we were going to look at. We took a deeper dive in December of 23 and had a town hall meeting. We said, let's kind of get everybody together and talk about it. We had round tables where everybody kind of talked about work-life balance. We had some people online as well, so we did it both because we wanted to make sure we weren't just including the individuals who were on ground. And then what happened was, at the same time, we were developing this committee for recognizing employees, faculty and staff. So we said, look, you know what, we'll take on that work-life balance issue and thing that we want to look at, right, through our committee. So that was one of the first things we did, because we hadn't even met yet as a committee. So in probably January, February, we met as a committee, and then one of the first things we did was work-life balance, okay? So we, had a lot of discussions. The first meeting was just discussions. What is work-life balance? How do we tie work-life balance to our Mercy value and so on? But the last question that someone asked, a committee member asked, they said, if someone is on a search committee and an applicant asks them, what does work-life balance look like at Carlow, how would you answer it? No one had an answer, right? So that really kind of propelled us into thinking, okay, how do we then move forward with this work-life balance? Because we really have to put some substance to it, because it was all just out there, right? We didn't really know what that meant, okay? So that's kind of the backstory of what I want to talk about. Just talk a little bit about the research. So a lot of the research around work-life balance, really the life piece is really the family piece, not, the society that we live in, where there are different cultures and the different backgrounds and different family structures. None of that had been really part of the play. Although there is some work out there that says that the health component of the domain is actually a very strong proponent for job satisfaction, than is the family piece. So, it kind of goes to say, if you're not healthy, how can you take care of your family anyway, right? If you're constantly not feeling well and so on. But that work-life balance, the life piece, that health was really a really strong component, okay? And so that's kind of where we landed with this work-life balance as a team, Edie and I, but then we kind of went on to, as a committee, so kind of go back to where we are as a committee, what did we do? So we decided we were going to think about some examples. So we kind of started at the bottom, although really our principles were our foundation. So the principles were kind of the overarching themes, if you will, of what we talked about in work-life balance. So assist employees in balancing personal and professional lives. How do we do that, right? These are the principles that we talked about at the higher level. Encouraging employees to divide time based on priorities. We're all in academics, right? So there are times when there's a lot of work to be done, it's very stressful, but there are other times when it's not. So have that balance and recognize we're not saying that everybody can, leave at 5 o'clock every day, right? Understand that there's a balance that we have to work through. Devoted to work, family, health, personal commitments. Again, understanding that everybody is coming from a different perspective, different ages, different parts of their life. Some have little kids, some kids are grown and out of the house. Again, all that has to factor into how we look at work-life balance, okay? Again, our ultimate goal was to establish a healthy work-life balance so that we can improve the overall health of our employees. And what does that happen? What happens with that? Increased productivity, right? When you have healthy workers, they're doing more, they're happy, they're coming to work, and it kind of all just works together, okay? So what we did was we decided to start thinking about examples. So our committee, again, we're back to the committee, thought about some of these examples. And I'll just share a couple of them with you today. We had a whole page of them that we have vetted through our shared governance process. It hasn't gone to cabinet and the president yet, although the president has seen glimpses of it, just to kind of give her a heads up. But for the most part, it hasn't gone there yet. So we're hoping to do that next week. It was supposed to be last week and it got canceled and we're like, okay. But we think we're going to be good. So thanks to Sister Sheila, last January or February, she introduced the concept of meetingless Fridays, where the last Friday of every month, we have no internal meetings. One of the things that we talked about in our committee was the fact that this wasn't carried through in 2023. So we said, you know what, we're going to go back and honor that. So that was one of our examples of how we're going to show work-life balance by honoring those meetingless Fridays, okay? It doesn't mean you can't have external meetings. It was just a matter of internally we're going to, stay with not having our meetings. We could have departments get together. We could work on, I know the first one back in March, the HR office worked on the employee handbook. Again, it was a day that we could spend and work on a project that we were trying to get accomplished. Establishing firm boundaries between work and personal life, understanding that it is the employee's responsibility to be accountable for that, okay? So again, that was one of the other examples. This one, we actually, as we started to vet this through some of the shared governance groups, I've heard that people are using this, and there's a delay delivery option in Outlook. So you can actually go into delay delivery and say, let's say you're doing it at 5 o'clock in the morning, and you're like, I'm not going to let everybody know that I'm working at 5 o'clock in the morning. So you go into your delay delivery, you click the date, and you click 7 a.m. or 8 a.m., whatever, and then it goes and it stays in your outbox so that when you log back in, when you get to work, it gets sent automatically. You don't have to send it. So that was another one that, as an example. A couple other examples, scheduling 45-minute meetings. There's a lot of efficiencies that can occur in 45-minute meetings. It was a way to kind of gather your notes from the previous meeting and then maybe move on if you had a back-to-back meeting, so have a little bit of space in between to run to the restroom or do whatever you need to do during that 15 minutes. This next one was a last-minute one that was added, the NRA rule, where I don't know if you all experienced this, but we experience a lot of emails, and it's two, and then there's like 6 or 8 people that are copied, right? So we're saying the NRA rule is don't reply to all, just reply. And then if you see that there are people that you should be replying to, include them in there or delete the ones that you think they just don't need to keep knowing about this, right? So we've tried to do that at some groups in our organization. And again, the whole idea is to promote a culture of health and wellness, which supports healthy living. Again, going back to, the kind of circling back to our roots of being a merciful institution, but also we want to be healthy because we want our employees to come to work and if they're not healthy, they're not coming to work, right? That's kind of how we serve them. So we did develop some discussion questions, although it's up, to anyone. So do you want to talk about it?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so the first one is, how can we apply our Mercy values and continue to improve work-life balance? What are some challenges you anticipate with work-life balance? And what future direction do you see with integrating work-life balance and employee health? So those are some of our questions. Yes.
So I'm gonna ignore your discussion questions.
Okay.
So great presentation, thank you for that. Edie, you opened a can of worms. So,
I always do it, and that's what I think conferences are for. It's to open the can of worms. That's our only opportunity.
So you led with the notion that women in our culture are definitely socialized to be the caregivers, the giver of self, more so than men in our culture. And yet our institutions are comprised predominantly of female workers, okay? And in my world of psychology, we like to talk about boundary setting, establishing boundaries, disrespecting boundaries, and whatnot. One of the challenges I see a lot amongst my colleagues is, students or other staff or faculty getting upset if, like, for example, a student crosses a boundary and expects something of us, and we try to establish a boundary, like, it might sound different if it comes across as, no, I'm not your mother, please tie your own shoes, or, whatever it is. Or you should go to a healthcare provider for that and not me, that sort of thing. And it can go really badly because there's this expectation. And a lot of us will be drawn into these tasks or relationships with students, other fellow faculty, fellow staff, etc., because of that lack of boundaries. So have you yet considered, there is a question here, have you yet considered anything specific to helping out with work-life balance that is specific to women as the employees and the service providers, etc.? Like, have you gone that far yet? Like boundary setting, I'm just going to suggest that.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. As we continue to try to figure out how we can address these challenges, and one of those things was, and it may have brought you back, is it's like you should be accountable for this. But if we are not used to setting boundaries, I mean, it's something that we can all talk about. What are successful ways to care for others, but also, it's not really helpful at some point to continue to create this kind of codependent faculty-student relationship. Yeah.
And I was going to say, Carol and I were talking about, blaming COVID for everything, but COVID kind of destroyed a lot of those boundaries. And now we're in this kind of post-COVID world of like, what are the, because home became work at home, family, and everything. And so, like, I know, but personally, I'm just always ready to do work at any time because I was so used to that. And trying to get out of that mindset, like, I think as institutions, and really everywhere we work, we're trying to figure out that balance. And we want work-life balance, but how do we reconcile those boundaries?
Right, and so one of the examples that we didn't share is the fact that, we have normal business hours, if you will, right? And so, someone on the committee said, well, so-and-so called me at 6 o'clock at night. And when they answered the phone, the person said, oh, I didn't think you were going to be picking up. And she said, well, why did you call me if you didn't think I was going to be picking up, right? So the idea was to set those boundaries and say, I mean, I hear people say, you know what, I'm on vacation and I'm not going to be available. There are ways with, even making those boundaries to say, okay, I'm going to be on vacation. If you need to reach somebody, call this person. Because that doesn't always happen where you're not deflecting, but diverting, sending them to other people in the interim so that you're not coming back to all that you missed, right? At least things can carry on while you're not there. So there were some things that we've incorporated in our list of examples. And again, it goes back to the employee being accountable to those boundaries.
But you have to learn how to empower people to set those.
Right.
Yes.
I would like to bring back the conversation to even before all of this. I am originally from Mexico. When I went to the US back in 2001, one of the first things that I noticed was that everybody, when they spoke about their weekend, they talked about how productive it was. And that was not a conversation that I ever heard in Mexico. If you talked about your weekend, it was like how much fun you had, where you went, how much you relaxed, how much you enjoyed going to the movies or doing this or that. But everybody in the US were like, oh, I worked so much. I did this and that. I'm so tired from the weekend. And to me, that was insane.
It is
Absolutely insane. To the point that I started lying. And I wouldn't do any of that work, but I would say, oh, it was so productive. Because that's the culture. So I don't know if people actually lie or if they do the things that they say they do, but it's the thing you say. So we should begin with that.
Yes.
People should begin addressing the culture that we are expected to be working 24/7,
Right.
even on the
Absolutely.
weekends.
Absolutely. There was a survey responded in the comment section that said when they asked their supervisor what were their hours when they started working at Carlow, they were told Carlow has no business hours. So basically you're expected to be on call, you know. So that was something and that's pockets, and we found out that there are many areas that are doing quite well. In fact, we had strongly agree in terms of, Carlow provides, time for me to spend time with my family, and then we had other pockets. So part of it's consistency. And if we as a university, we have to agree on our shared values and shared strategies and look at our culture and talk about what we value and how that translates into how we treat each other.
So
Yeah.
there's been a lot of research lately coming out about, especially in business, about the benefits of a 4-day work week. And I know some institutions of higher education have done it, which are report guys, right? Not a compressed work week, but an actual 32-hour work week. Is that something Carlow has discussed, or?
We did discuss it.
We did discuss it, yeah.
But what we did for this summer, we introduced summer hours. So it gets a little tricky for the non-exempts because we're still expecting them to work 40 hours a week. But basically, our normal business hours end at 2 o'clock on Fridays, beginning this Friday. So June 1st to August 14th during the summer. So we're trying to address some of those, again, work-life balance issues, and that was one way we did that. But we did talk about doing the 4 days, and
Not in the context of less hours, though.
not in the context of less hours, doing it as 4/10.
4/10, yeah. But I've read a study of one company that did that, and they said that actually productivity went up because, you go in and you get it done, and you're excited to go for your rest of your life.
There was a study
Yeah.
of like 50-something companies, I think, in Great Britain recently that they did, and it was the same thing. It was a 32-hour work week, and they found that productivity went up because people wasted less time, is really kind of what they found. So I think it's an interesting thing in the context of higher education to consider what that could potentially even look like.
There's two things. Agreeing with, that work-life balance and the expectation of productivity, sort of 7 days a week. One of the things, I'll make one comment, one of the things that Dr. Deeb, the president of Trocaire College, does in the summer is we only have 4 days for administration or staff, that they only work 4 days and it's Fridays off. Now for some classes, labs, depending on the program, we have 7 weeks or 10 weeks, and there'll be certain days that you work and certain days you're not expected. So there's a balance that really has helped our productivity and actually work satisfaction. But we choose whether or not as faculty, if we want to work over the summer, but another thing that I thought about, that I did a panel, mental health panel in May, because Mental Health Awareness Month is May, and one of the things we talked about was COVID and the impact of COVID on our students, not just ourselves. Now, bringing into what we just talked about, COVID brought, yes, that, round the clock, I'm going to handle it, I'm going to do this, but for students, it impacted them where they were used to things being solved right away, or if I didn't enjoy your presence,
Answer the
or
email right away.
yeah, I just wouldn't, or I would hide behind some other image or, comment, or just completely, take themselves out. So it unfortunately really impacted their emotional regulation. So now we see an emotional dysregulation where just simple conversations aren't happening, and then their work-life balance is affected now that they're all back, and so now students are all back. And one of the biggest things in the student satisfaction survey is, I don't have enough time. A lot of our students are non-traditional, but we're moving to traditional again. But we're getting this very strange, and it may not be strange, we may all share this, statistic where students are overinflated as they believe that they are more in tune with what school is supposed to be and how to handle it. Yet they get into school and they're like, I can't handle it because I don't know how to balance work, like work, as in now I'm employed, I'm raising a family, and I'm going to school. So there's 3 responsibilities. And then one of the things I at least tell my students is, enjoy the weekend. If I have homework, I'll try to do it within the week, and I'll say, we need to do it in the week. Boundaries, do it within the week.
That's true. Maybe
Do
that will help
this.
people do, work harder on those boundaries if they know they're
Right.
modeling it for the students.
Right.
Because that's one way
That's
to
one way.
one way to help people understand is like your students are watching you,
Mhm.
and so, are you really modeling self-care?
And are you responding at 3 a.m.? When
Yes,
they're
are you
responding
responding-
to you at 2 a.m.?
Yeah, and also you think about your colleagues.
your
If you start
syllabus.
responding at 3 a.m., they're going to go to the next class and expect that professor to respond. So
Absolutely.
think about that, how you're impacting their expectations in the next class.
So incorporating in syllabus.
Yes.
So I was wondering, in that work-life balance and that productivity kind of underlining of the conversation, how you're balancing that with culture, right? Like I feel like sometimes when we talk so much about we need to be more efficient, we need to, and don't get me wrong, I'm all about the 4-day week. I am. So just want to be mindful.
Everybody go back to their institutions and say, we decided this at the roundtable.
But I do also think that as a Mercy institution and the connection to our missions and in your case, your values of hospitality, that piece about how do we balance, yes, I need to be productive in my work hours, while still also having time to have community. Because I think we've lost that a lot within the Zoom world. We are highly, we have a lot of flexibility in the sense of being hybrid some days. And one of the pieces that I miss the most is, being able to connect with my colleagues after a meeting. As we're walking back to our offices, we lost that in the sense that the Zoom ends. I know that I usually am looking at people. I'll stay for a while and see who stays. And see who needs additional conversation after a Zoom meeting. Because that's the only time that we have in some ways to connect with folks. And I think that that's a key part of that Mercy, right? Who are we as a community? How are we supporting each other when we're having a good day or a bad day? And I think that sometimes that gets lost when we continuously talk about we need to balance and we need to be more efficient. So I wonder, have you had similar conversations? What are you doing to try to address some of that?
So I think some of it is, as an institution, managing expectations. So going back to, you know, the idea of if someone's, you know, emailing at 3 o'clock in the morning, is that the message that we're sending, right? To go back to what's our culture and how do we kind of rein it in? The challenge, I think, I see is that staffing sometimes is lower, so you end up having to work harder and take on more responsibility than you would have otherwise in, you know, in another institution or another, you know, setting. So again, I think it goes back to individuals being disciplined and being intentional about what they're doing, because it's so easy to get pulled into, yeah, I'll do that, you know, and then you're just like, what am I doing, right? So,
But is there time in, as you're saying, like, within work, not life,
mhm.
within work,
I see-
is there space for community?
Yeah,
I mean,
see, I
yeah,
see that.
and that's actually one of the items that we allow, and again, we didn't share them all, but one of them is that we allow individuals to have community. You know, on our meeting list Fridays, we encourage people to go to the dining, to eat together, to, you know, all those kinds of pieces are part of, I didn't mean to
And
interrupt
some of
you.
the survey respondents did talk about that.
Yeah.
You know, there's no, like, kind of common space for faculty to just all hang out
Mhm.
together. Like, so we're also trying to look at our spaces, because spaces help shape people meeting. Yes.
Georgia Court University, we happen to have, one of our perks is 45 meals per semester for faculty.
Oh, that's a good
So-
idea.
And we didn't have it for a couple of years because the president took it away. And I protested.
Good for you, good for you.
Because it was a huge part of our culture.
Yes.
Many times when we go for lunch, we hang out with our colleagues and we create new projects, we come up with new ideas, we learn about what they're doing. So it is part of the community. And when he took it away, I was like, no, this has to come back. I don't know what you can do about it. I don't know how much you're saving, because it wasn't that much money. And they ended up bringing it back. I don't know if it was because of me, but I was one of the
contributed
voices.
to it.
Yeah.
I just want to say that too, because I don't know about the institution you're at, but during the recession, 2008, 9, a lot of schools cut out the frivolous things, and a lot of them related to employee talent shows, you know, employee celebration, like all that were, you know, a lot of meals, you know, because that's expensive, of course, but I don't think the value was properly, I mean, you know, having like the roundtable, one thing that is, I know that the people are discussing is how can we help encourage the community, because that's so important and valuable.
Right. You know, we're sitting in Catherine McCauley's house, and I was downstairs drinking the tea and looked at the history. She worked tirelessly over 10 years for us to be sitting here.
Yes.
Francis Ward came to the United States. In the history, actually, even in the middle of winter, visited Sisters of Mercy walking through winters in Michigan. When I started at Mercyhurst, one of our 42 years ago, one of our founding sisters, or not founding, but well, I guess she probably was, mentioned to me that it's easy to do anything when you have money, but it's an art to do things when you don't. With that being said, first of all, I have to say that, Carol, you're my hero.
Oh, please.
And I'll tell you why, because Carol not only runs a program, but finds all the money to fund it through, and correct me if I'm wrong, spaghetti dinners, playing
Singing
backup for, now
Yeah.
how much you work to make sure that program is successful,
Yeah.
aside from that, almost round the clock.
I-
And when you start to look at how we're evaluated as faculty
Mhm.
on teaching skills, and community service and scholarship, which a big part of scholarship is finding funding, am I correct? As far as the situation, funding doesn't work 8 to 5. Funding is networking 24 hours a day, and you're out. And the point that I'm getting to is that the great things, sure, there are wonderful things that we can do. Some time off, maybe at the end of the week, or having meals, or, you know, some meals to sit together. There are those little things, but the main things, okay, as far as if we're gonna, and we're a Mercy college, and you know, money's not easy, the main things you have to, let's face it, we have to step in Catherine McCauley's steps and work tirelessly like Francis Ward and go after the great teaching skills, the scholarship of raising money, and still providing community. And so I don't know how to answer that better than what we just looked at.
Oh, Sister Sheila raised her hand.
It was a kind of a light bulb moment for me the first time I read in the Heritage Room downstairs the schedule for the Sisters' Day. Because what you discover is that they did not work all day long. They had periods where they were out in ministry, they had periods of prayer, they had periods of community. It was a work-life balance. And even Catherine McCauley's rhythm of contemplation and action suggests a balance in life between working and reflecting and engaging in other life activities that are energizing and enlightening. So I invite you all to go down and take a look at the Daily Herarium because it's a good example of what we're searching for.
And I just want to say too, I find this problem a lot in not-for-profits, but in corporate America, there seems to be more recognition, the importance of games and doing things and enjoying each other. It's just very odd that those of us who serve others seem to lose that and cut that away when the times get tough. Yeah.
So, as the sociologist in a room full of apparently psych people, it's really interesting to me because you're all getting at this idea of culture, and for me, what that means is the fact that most of our institutions, especially places of mercy, do have this idea where it's, we have a broken rubber band, let's tie it together and figure out how to create an engine, right? And so it's honorable and it's the right thing to not have work-life balance, to give it all to your work. And I think in addition to looking at the faces around the table, we have to think about what that does for professional development. So yes, we're supposed to get grants, they don't exist in that window. You're also supposed to do research, which is in the summer when you should be on vacation. And schools say you're most involved and you're really for the team when you're doing above and beyond, but at the same time, there's only so much candle wick to burn before you're out. And so if we do this individual approach where, okay, let's say the sociology department, who in the spirit of all of you is just me, if I decide to do the 9 to 5, right, then I am not fulfilling the same obligation. So when it comes to this work-life balance, I really do think it has to be done at the university level. It can't be one individual deciding, because then it's not going to look the same, and that's really true if you have people who are not tenured versus tenured, and you are kind of saying yes because you feel like you have to, versus saying yes because you want to. So I just think there's a lot that goes into this stuff, but I'm happy to see that there's a push forward for this at a structural level. Yes.
Yeah, what I would say, just along with all of that, I agree. I think so much of it speaks to the decision-making process and how we allocate resources and what we prioritize at our institutions. And I think a lot of times, you were talking about the recession and what we cut when times are tough.
Yeah.
The temptation is to start slicing around the edges, right? We cut travel, we cut funding for this, that, and conferences and things like that. And a lot of times what it ends up being is penny wise and pound foolish.
Yes.
But these are things that really do contribute to the betterment of the institution. and the betterment of the faculty, the betterment of the staff, et cetera. And it can be a challenge sometimes as a mission officer, you know, to make that argument that these are things that are really, really necessary, and you know, they're not in the places always to be cutting, that we should be investing in these things. So bringing that message back to our institutions, I think, is really important to say, you know, these are things that are worthwhile investing in because it's for the betterment of the entire institution.
Maybe we could think of retention, you know, like we think of retention for students. Maybe we can use that kind of lens for ourselves.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well,
Yes.
and that goes to the point that I think James was making as well, and that's we've cut people. Not necessarily, fortunately, in many cases, not actively employed jobs, but not filling positions or cutting lines whenever things are bad. And that has taken on, and we've taken on to the point where we can't really take on much more. You're doing three full-time jobs, you can't get them done. I am actually sitting here feeling guilty about taking a week away from work to be here. I know you are too, Edie, because this is critical time, right? And yet we're here.
I'm not a
because we
co-chair of Middle
have-
States with Matt.
Right? Right. But I mean, this is important because it's time together, it's time to reflect,
Yes.
and I think that that's something we have to give ourselves the gift of, is time to be in community.
I always think to myself, I developed this a long time ago, when I absolutely cannot meet with a friend for breakfast is the time I have to meet with a friend for breakfast.
Yeah.
That's when I have to. When I think to myself I cannot, I must.
So one of the degrees I hold is a master's in recreation administration. And I had to take a few classes there in which it was philosophy of recreation and some of the history of recreational services in the United States. One of the things that I learned that was really surprising to me as a 20-some-year-old was that the answer of what's the purpose of life had been answered from like for thousands of years. And the purpose of life, according to some Greek philosophers, is to enjoy it. And how many people are actually enjoying their life? And that's the reason why we need to have that balance, right? The other thing that I'm noticing right here is that a lot of us are one-person departments. I am the director of Latinx initiatives at my institution. And if I go, like you, there's nothing and nobody that can continue with that. And I wish I could train somebody or I could have someone as a backup. But there's no money to hire somebody else like me. And there's one other Latino person at my institution as a faculty member, and she's doing dance. And she's a famous dancer and choreographer. But again, if she leaves, we don't have a dance department. So we need to explore that. That theme needs to be explored in future talks also, because it is arising here.
You know, I think we Americans often are very independent and we think we need to solve everything. But maybe we should take a field trip to Mexico. You know, I mean, honestly, or learn from our partners in other Mercy institutions worldwide on how they encourage and spread mercy in ways that engender and help us change our culture. I also want to say one of the future directions that that I mentioned in my abstract is we have a very robust departments of faculty that are thinking about trauma-based advising. Alexis is involved with, you know, other trauma-based kind of models to help our students. But I was thinking there's some literature now on trauma-based institutions and ways we can look at the trauma that we hold institutionally due to the pandemic, due to racism, due to all sorts of cultural and other kinds of problems. And maybe with you know, the healing of our institution, you know, we can use that as a context because our institution is already invested in considering trauma and ways to approach and help people. So that's one thing that I think we're going to explore a little bit more.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, I was really struck when you were talking about the research into work-life balance, that it's work
family balance.
Right.
And the high percentage of women that you have on the faculty, work-family balance can be work balance. So when Jaime was talking about the weekends, I do laundry and clean on the weekends, that's
Right.
when it's
That's
time to
true.
do all
That's
stuff,
true.
get my son to swim lessons
Absolutely,
and like all
yeah.
this other stuff. So I wonder if that was part of your conversation at all, or kind of what you took away from the research that could be applied in your.
Right. So I think what I took away from it is the fact that it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Sure.
So, and that's the reality is, we can't just say, this is the way it's going to be for everybody, because it's different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So having that lens that one size doesn't fit all gives us an opportunity to add to the examples. I mean, we've said in our principles, in our list of, our principles of work-life balance, this is not an exhaustive list, and we encourage faculty and staff to submit other ones that we want to include on this list, right? So I think that just going into it, understanding that it's not a one-size-fits-all, helps us to be able to create possibilities without having to say, okay, does it fit this and this and this? You know what I mean? If that
And
makes
I
sense.
think it's also good for the institution to develop principles and share them, and also train people who have management, so that people feel empowered to look for opportunities to help their staff. Because some managers don't actually understand that they could offer certain things, and then they find out later that other departments have been giving this, providing these opportunities,
Sure.
and that their staff are resentful because they heard that this was a thing.
Mhm.
And so, somehow institutionally, saying these are our Mercy values, they're based in Mercy values, and we really, because what we found that there's pockets really doing it well at Carlow, and maybe sharing amongst ourselves our shared, talk about our culture and how we want, and also not-for-profits don't really invest a lot in management training, and Marianne is going to help us with that. So that could be integrated in training.